Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and an exciting one for you today because I have a review of the Ferrum stack of the Hypsos power supply and the Oor headphone amplifier and preamp. Alright, these units were loaned to me by a friend of the channel, and so I need to shoot this video and get these back to that person, but you know who you are. Thanks for the loan. You rock. Alright. Also, please remember to like and subscribe and to do all of those things that you do to support YouTube channels. Check out links below for ways that you can do that. All right. Ferrum is a relatively new company to the audio game, as far as I know. Now, I don't know a ton of company history for them here, but my understanding is that the people who run it are kind of veterans of the audio industry, but I don't remember who they are, okay? I want to talk about this unit here. The Oor and the Hypsos are among the first products offered by Ferrum, all right? And so let's talk pricing real quick. You can buy these two units separately if you wish. The Oor headphone amp is $1,995 US or euros, same number in either currency, according to Ferrum's website, which I will link to down below. And then the Hypsos power supply here is $1,195 US or euros. Again, I will link to that in the description below as well. Buy them together for $3,190 US / euros. Okay, so for the stack. For this review, I basically reviewed them as a stack. And the reason I did that is because I just am unaware of anyone that is using them separately from each other, particularly using the Oor separate from the Hypsos. I think it makes more sense to buy the Hypsos on its own, and I will talk about why in a little bit. Okay, but anyway, when we get to the sound impressions, and I will timestamp this video again so you can jump around and watch the parts that are relevant to you, but when we get to the sound impressions, it will be for these two together performing as a cohesive unit for that $3,200 US. Okay, running together, the Oor amp here is spec'd at 8 watts per channel at 60 ohms and 1600 milliwatts, which is 1.6 watts, at 300 ohms from the balanced output. It is a true balanced amplifier because both of those power output specs are cut in basically half if you use the single-ended output. I basically only listened from the balanced output because I think that will be the use case that most people who buy this amp will use it for. Okay. So we can talk features and all of that, and I will start with the Hypsos power supply here. So, I mean, both units are built pretty much the same. Like, they have the same basic chassis and aesthetic and all of that kind of thing here. We have this front panel display. We have a multi-function controller knob here to navigate the menus that are in here. And then this right here, this Ferrum logo, is a light that lights up. You will see it lit up here in a moment in a video clip that I'm going to show you about doing some changes here. Okay, the back panel of this power supply is pretty straightforward. We have a standard, 3-prong AC power cord connector here. We have a master power rocker switch, right? Then we have like trigger, 12-volt trigger if you want to use this to turn on another device or turn off other devices. And then we have this USB connection here as well, which I don't believe is a data port. I'm pretty sure that is power. I will have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Then we have this round 4-pin power output connector here. This is what sends the power that this thing supplies to whatever audio component you are using it as the power supply to. Could be the Oor, could be another Ferrum DAC amp that they call the Erco, I believe. I believe that is correct. But you also have the option of using this unit to power many other audio devices because there is an adjustable voltage output here with numerous factory presets for components from other manufacturers. Like I know I've seen iFi and Macintosh and like several other brands that you would recognize as I scrolled through the menu here. So basically anything that you can match this power output to with cabling and that this supplies enough power for, you should be fine to use. And again, there are plenty of presets for it. Now, I do want to go through some of the menu features of the Hypsos. So I made a clip that's from the perspective of my desk, and that will show like changing the voltage, the power output, and some of those presets that I made, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, because this Hypsos unit is really flexible, and I think that is one of its strengths. So let's look at that clip, then we'll come back to me on camera for the rest of the review. I want to give you a quick rundown of the Hypsos power supply here and what it can do. So when it's plugged in and powered on, you just hit this button here and you get this menu that shows up. And if you just use the rotary function of this button, you could go into settings, right? And what we see here, is, voltage output and all of that kind of stuff. If we go to settings, right, and we have a bunch of options in here. So I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with just this power supply unit in here. Right? And what I'm going to do is look at the power output, because I think this is where things get cool. All right, and if you select current device here, you get some info over here. Hopefully this shows up on the camera. I don't know if it will or not, but we see that we're powering the Ferrum Oor at 24 volt output. But we can reconfigure that if we want to, right? And it's kind of like Windows, makes you think of everything. And what we see in this menu here, hopefully this shows up, is that we have like a bunch of different amps in here, like i-Fi. Here's the iCan SE in there, right? We have, just a bunch of familiar brands, a lot of i-Fi in here, of other amplifiers that this thing could be the power supply for. I mean, Martin Logan is in here. I mean, there's a few of them, a bunch of Macintosh, okay, and so forth. So I mean, you can select factory preset power output for a bunch of amps from different manufacturers, or products I should say, from different manufacturers, to make this the power supply for. Now I'm just going to go back to Ferrum Oor here, because I don't actually want to change it, but I just thought that would be a cool thing to show you. And then this is pretty common too, is that it takes a moment to, it's like, are you sure? And then it counts down. So to test sonic differences, there's no quick switching here. Like, you've got to manually change it in the menu, which can take a while. What I wanted to do here is not only can you do presets for different devices, but you can adjust the voltage up or down. So for the Oor amplifier here, it defaults to 24 volt output, but I can decrease that in 1/10 of a volt options all the way down to 22. And looks like we can go pretty high here, all the way up to 30 volts. Okay, so this functions a lot like, if you remember Eddie Van Halen, okay, legendary guitarist for the band Van Halen. I'm just going to set this at 26 volts actually, because I want to do a little bit of listening at the higher voltage just to confirm what I think I have already heard. But Eddie Van Halen had what he called a variac, or a variable AC power supply, on his guitar amps. And I think who was it? It was Rick Beato on his channel Everything Music, which, if you're a music fan, you need to watch Rick's channel. You really do. Okay. Anyway, he talked about how Eddie Van Halen used that variac, and he had a guitarist friend come on to help him do it in this video. I will find this video and link to it, because I think it will illustrate a very similar thing that happens with the Hypsos power supply here. Is that when the voltage of this variac was dropped low, meaning that a lower voltage went into the guitar amps, the guitar amp started to sound a little bit slower. It would not respond to string plucks and that sort of thing as quickly, which resulted in a thicker, richer sound. And then conversely, if you overdrive the guitar amp with that variac, I mean, you put it at a voltage slightly higher than it is factory spec'd to be, then it would make the sound tighter, faster, and a little bit drier sounding. And I have observed the same qualities happening here with the Oor amp. You drop the Hypsos down to 22 volts, it sounds warmer and thicker and like a little bit richer. Okay, and then if you go up a few volts, like above the 24 volt standard, it starts to sound a little bit quicker, drier, maybe a touch leaner as well. So that's a really cool feature with the Hypsos power supply here. That, I mean, you do get a little bit of fine tuning with this voltage adjustment. Now, of course, you do have to be careful with that. I didn't have any other devices to check this voltage change with, but I imagine that there are devices out there that you don't want to change this too much or you will do some damage. But for fine tuning, these are not radical changes. Okay, not night and day differences, but for fine tuning, that's pretty cool and allows you to give just that little bit of extra flavor that you may or may not want in your amp for a given thing. All right, I think that's enough for this little clip. Let's get back into the rest of the review. All right, back on camera, and I will make some more in-depth comments about how changing the output voltage of the Hypsos specifically affects the sound of the Oor when we get to the sound portion of this review. And again, see timestamps if you want to jump there. All right, let's do a quick unit tour of the Oor headphone amp. Okay, front panel here, fairly straightforward and Spartan. We have a similar light-up Ferrum logo here, which is dimmable here on the back. Okay, so you can dim that if it's too bright, not bright enough, whatever. Then we have the 4-pin XLR headphone output here. We have the 6.35 millimeter / 1/4 inch headphone output single-ended here. And then we have 2 rotary switches. So this first one right here is a multifunction switch that selects the RCA single-ended input, the XLR balanced input, or when it's in the middle, it's power off. So selecting an input here doubles as turning the amplifier on and off. Now, one quibble that I do have with this unit is that function. I would prefer to be able to switch inputs without having to turn the amp off, because you can hear it click, like it powers down, and then when you switch to the input, it powers on again, and you can hear those relay clicks of it turning off and on again. I realize that not a lot of people might do a whole lot of switching between the balanced and the single-ended input here, but I mean, you might. I just think that that switch probably should have gone power, RCA, XLR, or something like that. But that's one minor usability quibble that I have here. Then this knob right here is a 3-position gain setting where we have a -6 dB gain, a 0 gain, and then the high gain, which is +6 dB gain right there. Okay, and then the potentiometer knob right here, which has some nice resistance to it and feels pretty smooth, but it has a nice amount of resistance to it. It's nice to use. Okay, back panel. We have 2 sets of XLR balanced connections and 2 sets of RCA single-ended or unbalanced connections. Okay, here we have the inputs. Okay, so connect a balanced DAC here or a single-ended DAC here. And then here we have the preamp outputs. Okay, if you wanted to connect this to an amplifier of a different type, or if you have desk speakers or like powered speakers or something like that, somewhere that you want to power or use this as a preamp for, you can do that. We have fuse here. We have the Ferrum logo display dimmer knob right here, and then we have the 12-volt trigger. Okay, right here. Actually, it says DC in 22 to 30 volts. Oh, excuse me. This right here, this lower input is actually for a power supply if you do not buy the Hypsos. This comes with a power supply cord that plugs in right there. Okay, so I mean, it is like a wall wart kind of thing. I'd have to check. I didn't end up using it because, like I said, I used this with the Hypsos, but from memory, okay, it's not a wall wart. It's got the transformer brick in the middle of the cord, but like that goes in here. But I think more people are going to be interested in this right here because this is a matching 4-pin DC power connector, okay, to the output of the same build on the back of the Hypsos. And then when you buy the two units together, you get this connector here, which is about 18 inches or so long, so about 1/3 of a meter, okay? A little bit more than 1/3, maybe half a meter, okay, for you on the metric system. All right, with the two 4-pin power connectors here, and then we have like these spring-loaded sleeves on the connectors to help it lock into position back there. So this is the umbilical cord that connects the Oor to the Hypsos when you buy them together. Okay, so I think that's it for unit tours. Let's talk about the sound, okay, because I know that's what we're all excited about. All right, the test gear that I used for this, I used 3 different DACs. 2 of them were the Bifrost 2. One was the original. The other one is the new 2/64 Bifrost 2 upgrade from Shit. Okay, this was one of the amps. The Ferrum Oor and Hypsos was one of the amps that I used to evaluate the new 264 when I did that review. So see a link to that review down below. Then my high-end reference DAC that I have on hand is the Berkeley Alpha Series 2. And that is connected via AES to a Singer SU2 USB bridge. So that's connected via USB to my computer. All right, and then I used Ottervana as my source for either locally stored FLAC or DSD files and Qobuz streaming. All right, a plethora of headphones used. I used 2 versions of the HE1000 from Hi-Fi-Man, the V2 and the SE. Review of the SE coming up sometime in the future when I can get to it. Ton of stuff to get to right now. I also used the Hi-Fi-Man HE6 SE V2. I used Audeze MM500. I used the new RAL CA1A circumaural ribbon headphone. I used Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm. I used Fostex TH900 with Lawton chambers on it. I'm sure that I used other headphones in there as well, but that covers like the different headphone types. Planars of various sensitivity and impedances, high Z dynamic, low Z dynamic. There's even that ribbon in there. See my review of the RAL CA1A, which is also brand new. Link in the description below for that. Okay, that was the test gear. What about the sound of this thing? So, right off the bat, and I'm just gonna let you know if you're wanting to buy this unit, thinking about buying this stack, or if you just ever get a chance to hear one, do not expect to be wowed, okay? This may sound like a negative comment. It is not. This is not an amp that is tuned or designed or comes across as intending to just grab your attention in any particular aspect. What it does is just about everything really well. You can name a technicality. You could like soundstage, imaging and separation, timbre, impact, like low bass punch or slam, something like that. You can name a sonic characteristic and you will find an amplifier that is better than this at any of those given features. It may be better than the Oor and Hypsos stack at 2 or 3 of those things, but it's not going to be better at all of them. What's interesting about this to me, and what took some time to tease out, is that even though this doesn't have that wow and grab you right away thing, if you keep listening to it, you realize that it does almost nothing wrong. Okay? And that really is its biggest strength in a nutshell. Combine that with the fact that it's got really good power output and control, it drives everything. Like everything that I threw at it, it handled fine. Okay, super sensitive, low impedance dynamics, good. Okay, no problem there. High efficiency planars, good. Low efficiency planars, good. The new RAL CA1A ribbon headphone, which is an absolute bear on an amp. It is a hard driving piece. Hypsos, or excuse me, Oor and Hypsos, like I had to crank the potentiometer and the high gain, you know, up into the 2-3 o'clock range sometime, but handled it fine, okay? Didn't sound overstressed or like it was losing control when it was getting pushed that hard. So it drives everything. I know a lot of people out there pair this with a Susvara. I believe it because my HE6 SV2, my experience with the RAL, all of that stuff, they all sound fine, right? There is plenty of power, and not just power delivery and control for pretty much everything out there. That's also a strength, okay? Now, in terms of its sonic qualities then, like again, it is very neutrally tuned at the default 24 volt Hypsos output, I should say, and I'll talk about how the sound changes when we change the Hypsos voltage output for the Oor here in a little bit. Okay, but at the default 24 volt Hypsos output, the Oor sounds very neutral. It has a very, very quiet sonic background. In fact, I don't think I ever noticed the sonic background even once on any of the gain settings or on any headphone that I can remember. You put super sensitive IEMs in it, you might hear it, but with most headphones, you're probably going to be plugging into this thing. It's just not going to be an issue. Okay, so super quiet, and then it always sounds in control, and it has a very excellent balance of all of the sonic technicalities you could care about. Again, it's not going to super stand out in any one technicality, either in the positive, but also arguably more importantly, even in the negative direction. So the detail retrieval, it's very detailed. It resolves as well as it needs to, it seems, but it presents the detail in a very natural way. It's not forced, but it also never sounds like it's lacking. It just plays it right down the middle, okay? Sounding really good. Again, it's not going to grab you, but also when you listen, nothing is really missing either, okay? There are present dynamics. So there is a fair amount of like activity to the sound, like low end, punch, slam, physicality, those kinds of things are here. You get pretty good speed through the mids and the treble and all of that. But again, the dynamics, they're not going to reach out and grab you, nor are they ever going to stand out as being lacking. At least that's how my ears heard it. So just really balanced in terms of the presence of the dynamics too. The sound staging is not huge, it is not small, it just kind of is. Okay, and then within the sound stage, you get really good imaging and separation and then layering in the depth. So it does positional effects very well. And also the 3 dimensions of the sound stage. Again, it doesn't sound particularly wide or tall or deep. And it also doesn't sound the opposite of any of those. It's just very well balanced in all 3 of the spatial dimensions in its soundstage. Okay, the timbre is also strong, sounds fairly natural, but again, it doesn't stand out as being just amazing timbre or distractingly bad in any way. So, I mean, that's kind of the theme that I noticed here with the Oor and Hypsos stack, is it kind of plays everything straight down the middle. Not really standing out as being amazingly awesome at the price, but also definitely never dragging anything down either. All right, now that might mean that it sounds boring, and I did not get that. Again, if you're expecting it to be wowed when you first power this thing on and plug a headphone in, even if it's fully warmed up and you've let it sit for hours just warming up, which I didn't really notice any warm-up effects really with this amp either. But even if you come to it when it's been sitting there for a couple of hours warming up, like it doesn't have that immediate grab the attention trait. But when you're listening, there's just little, if anything, that ever gets in the way. Okay, so, and it mostly just lets the headphones that you plug into it be those headphones, which I think is also a compliment here. And it just strikes a nice balance between being fun and engaging, but never being dull or boring either. If there is one quibble that I have with it sonically, and this is strictly a personal preference thing for some of the music that I like to listen to, I do not think this is actually a technical fault or flaw, but it doesn't do epic very well. When it needs to sound big and huge and impressive, like you're listening to the 1812 Overture or Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or any soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, or, you know, on the rock side, if you're listening to Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, you know, things like that where the hugeness of them and the epicness of their presentation is part of the experience, then the fact that this doesn't throw a particularly huge soundstage can get in the way a little bit. So, like the hi-fi mids, the two HE1000s that I have on hand, the V2 and the SE, like those egg-shaped hi-fi mids just generally stage big. They sound enormous. It's kind of a trait of that line, right? They still sound big and enormous when they're plugged into the Oor and Hypsos stack, but they don't sound quite as big or as grand or, again, epic as they do from my Vio V281 or like the SPL Phonitor X that I also have in, which we'll get to those comparisons a bit more in a moment. But that to me is not a technical flaw. You definitely could be a fan of music for which that doesn't matter at all. I mean, it's just a preference thing. And that would be like my biggest quibble of the sound on this. Okay, if I were going to pick a quibble. All right, let's move to what happens to the sound of the Oor if you adjust the voltage on the Hypsos. Now, I talked a little bit about this in the video where I worked through the menu of the Hypsos a little bit. And in there, I mentioned that if you drop the voltage down from the default of 24 volts for the Oor to 22 volts, you get a little bit thicker, richer, slightly warmer frequency in response kind of sound. And that's true. What also happens is that you sacrifice just a little bit of micro detail and a little bit of positional audio ability. Like you sacrifice the ability to place things in the soundstage a little bit. The depth dimension flattens, noticeably so, doesn't become wall of sound, but it flattens some, and then you like it, particularly in the separation, creating space between sonic images, there's a little bit of a hit there. So, but the other thing that it does is it can relax the mid-range a little bit. So if you have a headphone, like I noticed this a lot on both the MM500 and the CA1A, where dropping the voltage down tamed the mid-range peaks that those two headphones have to a fairly significant degree, where I found them much more enjoyable and tolerable from a frequency response standpoint. But then after the initial, oh, there's a little bit less offensive mids here and a little bit more warmth and punch to the sound, I would say, but the decay is slower. And that slower decay is making some of the detail retrieval, some of the detail retrieval is getting lost in the shuffle. And it definitely was having an adverse impact on the imaging and the separation and the flattening of the sound stage in the depth dimension a little bit. So trade-off, right? Nothing comes for free. All right, if we increase the voltage, and I just tried just going 2 volts the other way, so going to 26 volts, where again the default is 24 volts, like the sound dries out a little bit. Everything gets a little bit thinner and brighter sounding, not quite as much warmth, okay, in there. I think the imaging and the separation and the depth and all that actually tighten up a little bit. Like the positional effects become even more noticeable, but they also can become a little bit over-pronounced to a level where they start to sound a little bit less natural to my ear. And so then everything again just comes across as a little bit more thin, dry, and aggressive to me when you up to 26 volts. So again, it's a trade-off. Do you want the enhanced spatial presentation, a little bit more detail emphasis, to sacrifice a little bit of that smoothness and listenability? Get your call, okay? But the point is, you can do some fine tuning of the sound with the Hypsos, changing his voltage output, and the Oor. Now, I want to avoid making blanket statements about if you use the Hypsos with another audio component that's not the Oor, I can't guarantee how it's going to react, okay? My guess is more often than not, you're going to get that, you know, richer, thicker sound if you reduce the voltage, and you're going to get that brighter, drier sound if you increase the voltage. But it may not always be the case. Also, the magnitude of these changes that I'm talking about here are not as significant as if you were to swap out a DAC, okay? Replace whatever DAC you're using with something else. So if you want the warmer, thicker sound and you were using like a really neutral, incisive kind of DAC, like my Berkeley is really neutral and incisive, but switching to like the original Bifrost 2, you could hear like that warmer sound kind of coming through again. Now, the detail wasn't there because there's no way a Bifrost 2 is ever going to resolve in the way that the Berkeley does. But the point is like you can get a DAC that changes the sound in the direction you want more so than just adjusting the voltage on the Hypsos will do. But the fact that you can get some changes by adjusting the voltage on the Hypsos is a cool fine-tuning feature that doesn't exist with a lot of other stacks out there that could definitely be beneficial to you in whatever your use case scenario is. So it's definitely worth mentioning and a cool feature of this unit. Okay, all right. Let's do some quick comparisons to other headphone amps that are sort of on the performance tier, probably, of these two together. So again, these two together are like $3,200 US. It's long in the tooth now and it's an older unit, but I have still my Vioelectric HPA V281 amp, which I think with the options that it has is around the $2,800 price point when it was in its day. And then as I also mentioned, I have an SPL Phonitor X, which I think can normally be had brand new around $3,500 USD. Okay, on most of the technicalities, the Ferrum stack was again right down the middle of the two. Like the Vio signature leans a little bit warmer, wider, punchy. Okay, and a little bit more smooth, like kind of in its, even though it's punchy, a little bit smoother in its presentation. The SPL Phonitor X, a little bit of a spoiler for a review that I will do for that here in the near future, is just huge. It pushes the mids and the treble forward a little bit, seems to sacrifice a little bit of bass oomph and control, but really well controlled, but big mid-range treble presentation, enormous soundstage, with excellent imaging and separation. So both the Vio and the SPL stage bigger, particularly in the width, though I think the Ferrum stack might have the Vio beat in depth just slightly. Okay, but in terms of like doing the positional effects, I would say the Oor is just slightly stronger than the Vio, but not as good as the SPL. So again, kind of like right down the middle of the two. The signature is more neutral, as I said, right down the middle. The dynamics, like the Vio is more dynamic, particularly in the low end. The SPL is not going for a super dynamic sound. Okay, so the Ferrum stack, again, right down the middle between those two. Okay. So then, like, the treble control, sometimes the Vio, the V281, can get just a little bit sharp, just a little bit, particularly with some DACs, like my Berkeley, for example, with the Hi-Fiman HE1000 V2, just as an example. Every once in a while, if I have a quibble with that chain, which I love, is that with some recordings, it does get a little bit too hot in the treble. The Oor and Hypsos had more control than with that headphone in the treble than the Vio did, but I wouldn't say it was as controlled as what the SPL can do. Okay, so again, down the middle. The Vio can kind of relax the mid-range a little bit, which for me and the way my ears work is beneficial with a lot of headphones, like the MM500 and the CA1A benefit from that relaxed mid-range sound a little bit. The Oor, again, at its 24 volt with the Hypsos at 24 volts is a little bit more present in the mids than that, so makes that problem worse for those particular headphones, but the SPL pushes them forward even more. Okay, so again, right down the middle. All right, and then I think the Vio again has more slam. The SPL has less slam. This, again, right down the middle. So you kind of get the pattern here, right? So both of the other two amps will stage bigger, but just about everything else in the technicality range, the Oor is like between them, with the Vio and the SPL just trading which one they're stronger at, you know, in either case. And that, I think, kind of reinforces the general theme of this review and in reviewing this stack, is that it does not reach out and grab you and wow you, but be patient, stick with it. You will realize it does virtually nothing wrong. You will find other amps near the price that do individual things better, but it's very, very unlikely you're going to find anything near this price that does everything better. Hard to picture. Maybe it exists, but I have a feeling if it did exist, everyone would be buying it right now, and that would have been on my desk and not this. Okay, at least not right now. Okay, so yeah, that's just kind of my takeaway here, is that this stack here is really good. Drives everything. Virtually absent sonic background. Really strong performer. Not outstanding in any particular way, other than the fact that it is outstanding in how it just does so little wrong. There could be then some preference quibbles that you have because it may not stand out in the feature that you are looking for something to stand out in. Like for me, with soundstage size, with a sliver of music that just needs to be epic. Okay, so I will leave it there. I'm Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Ferrum Oor and Hypsos stack. Thanks again to the friend of the channel who loaned this. I will get this out to you probably the day after I film this, and to the rest of you, thanks for watching and enjoy the music.